Hey everybody, what's going on? Today we're going to be doing a rifle setup video. Now this is something I actually do fairly frequently. I'll get friends or coworkers who will buy a rifle, buy a scope and bring it to me and say, hey, set this up for me, because they know I have a range and that I've done this quite a bit. So that's the case today. This is a Christensen Arms Mesa rifle, and this is a Vortex scope. This particular guy bought this is going to be a gift for another guy, so he brought me the rifle and scope, said hey, set it up for me. So I've got the rifle, I've got the scope, and I've got a box of ammunition. Now before we get started shooting here, I'm going to go ahead and show you the steps that I took to get this rifle set up and looking the way that it is right now. All I'm going to do is run a solvent soak patch here through the bore. My preferred cleaner is Vortex Eliminator. Just going to put a little on the patch here, wet the bore down, and then push a few clean patches through just to make sure there's no oil or anything like that in there. Go ahead and give it one more wet patch and then just kind of let it sit and soak for a little bit. One thing to remember is that these rifles have all been test fired, so they're not coming to you clean completely. And I'm not trying to get it, down to bare metal. I'm just trying to make sure there's no junk in here before we start. You see on a brand new gun how dirty that patch still is. So we're gonna let this sit, and then we'll come back, push a few clean patches through it, push a clean alcohol patch through it, and we'll call that good. Some people might wonder why not use a bore guide. I typically do if I'm brushing or doing a bunch of brush strokes, or if I'm using abrasives or something like that. But for something simple like this, just pushing a few patches through, it's not really necessary. All right, now we'll go ahead and push a couple clean patches through. Given that it's kind of still dirty, I'm going to go ahead and push one more wet patch through and let that sit a couple more minutes. Alright, we're going to go ahead and patch it out with a clean patch, follow it up with an alcohol soak patch, just to get any last residue out of it. This last patch is just going to be some rubbing alcohol. I will take a patch and just kind of swab out the chamber a little bit. You can use different mops or different attachments. I kind of like to just do some circles in the chamber, spin it around a little bit, and then go ahead and push it on out. And we're going to call that good enough for the cleaning. Last thing I'll do is take a little bit of grease and put just on the back of the lugs here. Don't need very much at all. Not really trying to, make a big mess here. Just a little bit on the surface so that as those lugs lock over, you're not causing excess wear. And that's it. Now we're ready to go ahead and mount a base. Get some rings on here at the scope, and we'll be ready to shoot. Okay, now that we've got the barrels scrubbed out, we're going to go ahead and mount a base, some rings, and a scope. So the base I ordered for this particular rifle is I went ahead and got the base from Christensen, and now this is a regular long action Remington 700 base. But I've done a couple of these rifles, and I like to just buy the Christensen base so that I know it'll fit right and it'll match the finish and all that. So comes in the package with the base. This is a 0 MOA base. Typically I would buy a 20-minute base, but I know that the guy that this rifle is going to is not a long-range shooter. He's gonna never touch the 0 on this rifle once I get it done. So a 0 MOA base will be fine. We're going to be installing a scope with a drop reticle. So we'll go ahead and throw this base on there. Going to put some Loctite, some blue Loctite on these screws, torque them down to 25 inch-pounds, which is what is stated in the directions here. And then we'll go ahead and get the rings and the scope mounted up. So the directions here say to apply some medium strength thread locker to the screws, which we've done. This is just some Permatex blue thread locker. And then we're going to loosely install the screws in the base, which we've done. And then what you want to do is make sure that your base is pushed forward all the way as far as it will go. And then we're going to go ahead and torque these down to 25 inch-pounds, starting at the front and working back as the directions call for. Alright, so the base is installed, torqued, and we'll move on to rings and scope. Okay, so I've got the rings knocked up here on the base. I've got the scope just kind of sitting. I've adjusted it approximately where I want it. For this, I like to just kind of, get it put in place, hold it up to my eye, make sure that my eye relief is good and it's at a comfortable spot. You will notice one thing here on this particular scope is it's a fairly short body on the scope, and this being a long action rifle, this is a great reason to run a one-piece Picatinny base like this, so that you can position your rings where you want them. Like if you're trying to run a separate bases on this scope and not a one piece, this scope isn't going to fit very well on this rifle, and you'd probably have to find a scope with a longer body here on it. But with a one-piece base, you can pretty much take any scope and put it wherever you want. So I'm going to go ahead and pull the scope off here, torque the bottom of these rings to the spec. Now these are worn Maxima rings. These I've used worn rings in the past. I like them. These are really high-quality aluminum rings, and they're not crazy expensive. This is a heavy recoiling caliber. This is a 300 Win Mag, but the base is aluminum, so it makes sense to go ahead and use aluminum rings as well. So the torque spec on these, 25 inch-pounds for the clamp screws here. So I'm going to go ahead and torque those down. Then we'll get the scope put in, leveled, and we'll go ahead and put the caps on and torque those to spec as well. I'm not going to use any Loctite on these rings themselves. I have before. It's just, if you're, these probably aren't going to get moved around, but with my rifles, I'm apt to come in and change an optic or move some rings around or something like that. So if you put Loctite on them, then all the threads are now gummed up with Loctite if you're trying to move stuff around. And I don't really think it's necessary. You can always come back and check the torque on these or re-torque them. The reason I put the Loctite on the base screws is a lot of times those are covered up and you can't really check that torque without taking your optic all the way off. So once again, just like with the base, we're going to push these ring bases to the front. Make sure they're pushed as far forward as they can before we torque them down. Okay, now that those are torqued up, we're going to go ahead and put the scope back in. Set it back to where I had it. Now, a certain amount of this is eyeballing, but I've mounted a lot of scopes and I kind of know how I like them. So, as far as leveling the scope, you can do all kinds of different bubble levels and set them on your barrel and level the scope that way. They've got, bubble levels that'll go in the raceways for your bolt here. What I found that works the easiest is I've got a flat edge here. This is a metal flat edge. And so all I'm going to do is I'm going to slide it up underneath the scope here. And if you put one edge in the bottom of the groove here on the rail, you can just apply some upward pressure to the base of your scope here, which is flat, and you can flatten it that way, and that's going to get the scope, at least the body of the scope, level to the rail. And then if you're running a level, you can just adjust the level from there. Now this guy isn't going to run a level, he's not a long range shooter, so this is going to be plenty good for any hunting application. I'm going to go ahead and set my ring caps up here, and we'll get these screws started. And then before we snug them down, we'll go ahead and make sure it's level again. And then really what's important here is when you tighten these ring caps up, you want to maintain an equal gap between the top and the bottom on both sides as you torque down the screws. And then we're going to torque them to the Vortex scope here comes with its recommendation for torque, saying not to exceed 18 inch-pounds. Now, adjusting the gap on the rings is a little bit of just trial and error. Just kind of eyeball it, just get it pretty close. Now, one thing I don't do, and I've never done, is to lap scope rings. I've used a lot of different scope rings. I've even used pretty cheap ones, and I've just never had an issue with the scope moving around on me if I follow the proper torque specs, and do everything else right. So it's not something I mess with. If you want to lap, by all means, that's fine, but I don't. So, go ahead and back our torque wrench down to 18 inch-pounds. Double check that we're level here. Now all I'm doing with this straight edge is, like I said, I'm putting it in the groove on the base, and then I'm applying a little upward pressure, and that's going to just force the scope level. I'm still fairly loose on the ring caps here, so it can move around, but I'm just going to bump it a couple times, make sure it's level, and then I'll go ahead and torque down from there. Now as I'm tightening these down, I'm just maintaining that gap on both sides, and I'm just slowly snugging those screws down, alternating sides and alternating front and back screws until I get it torqued to spec. So I got the front one done. I'm going to go ahead and do the back one, and then we'll be done. Okay, our base, our rings are all torqued to spec, so we're going to be ready to go ahead and shoot this thing. The scope that they picked for this particular build is this Vortex Eagle. Not a scope that I am familiar with or have seen before. I use some Vortex scopes, but I've never used one of these. It's a 4-16 by 50, and it's got a BDC reticle. The MOA subtensions are laid out in the manual, which is nice. We're going to go ahead and likely zero this scope for 200 yards, as that is what the manual says will correlate to the 300 Win Mag here. So we'll go ahead and zero it at that, and then we'll shoot it out to distance and kind of verify that those subtensions line up where they should. It's a second focal plane, so we'll need to make sure that if we're using those subtensions that we're on maximum magnification. So anyway, next up we'll be shooting it out to distance after we get a good zero. Okay, so one last thing. I almost forgot to film it here, but something I do that's important to do on every new rifle is to make sure that your action screws are torqued to the correct spec. So I went ahead and looked this up online, and they call for 65 inch-pounds of torque on the front and back screws. I like to start on the front and then follow up at the rear and get those torqued down. Okay, we should be good to go. So what I'm going to do here today is put a zero on it at 50 yards, a quick zero, and then I'm going to take it back to 200 yards and confirm a 200 yard zero. So the way that this reticle in this scope is set up with this 300 Win Mag, we're going to zero at 200 yards, and then the subtension should be correct on the drop reticle for 3, 4, 5, and 6. Now I've only got 500 yards to work with, so we're going to go ahead and zero it and then go ahead and shoot those drops and just see how close they are. Now, from what I understand is this rifle is going to be used out of probably just a blind shooting whitetail at around 100 yards. So likely this guy won't shoot it this far, but we're going to go ahead and shoot it and see what happens. First thing we're going to do, you can see I've got the bolt taken out. We're going to quick bore sight it, shoot it, and then we ought to be pretty close to 200 yards. So bore sighting a rifle is exactly what it sounds like. You're just taking the bolt out, you're looking down the barrel at the target, and then you're going to make rough adjustments to the scope to make the reticle line up with what you're seeing in the bore. Okay, that's got our reticle in the center of the sight picture that I'm seeing by looking through the bore. So we're going to go ahead and load it up, fire around, and see where we hit. Okay, so that first shot is really close, just a tiny bit low and a tiny bit left. So we're going to make another rough adjustment, and we're going to move on to 200 yards. Now I've done a couple rifle setups on this nearly this exact same rifle. I've done 2 other Christensen Mesas. Both of them in 300 PRC. This one's in 300 Win Mag. But one thing that I've learned after doing those setups, and one of the reasons I'm out here on a pretty cold day, that's going to be helpful, is that these barrels are incredibly thin. And on the 300 PRCs that I've done, those things are burning so much powder on every shot. They heat these barrels up, and these barrels will walk shots after about 2 rounds. So I've pretty much eliminated shooting more than 3 as an absolute max at one time. I'm going to be shooting a little bit more than that today, but I'm hoping that the cold temperatures will help me. If I take a little break and let it cool in between shots, that'll kind of help me not be throwing shots all over the place. But these do warm up, and they do fling shots. Now, for a hunting rifle, it's fine. 1 or 2 shots is probably all you're going to take. But trying to come out here and shoot 5-10 shot groups, don't even do it. Especially if you're trying to do it in the summer, you're going to get 2 that are fairly reliable, and everything after that is going to be anybody's guess as where they go. Okay, we're set up here at 200 yards. Got a paper target down there. I'm going to go ahead and fire a few shots. I'm going to film through my spotting scope. Hopefully it only takes me about 2 rounds to get on paper. Like I said, these barrels will heat up. Once we do that, we're going to let it cool a little bit, and then we'll shoot it on steel to 3, 4, and 500. If this reticle is accurate, we'll be able to get hits out that far. So. Okay, little story hour. Now, what we've got going on here is something that unfortunately is the case with a lot of hunting rifles and a lot of cheap scopes. So what we've got is a combination of factors working with us here. So I'm shooting this target. Let's see, this is not right side up to you, but this is the way I've got it hung at 200 yards. So we started off after we did our bore sight, and we fired 2 rounds. Now, we missed one of those, and we caught this one on paper here. So, this is a 100-yard target. Each of these large squares are 1 minute of angle. So this scope is 1/4 minute of angle adjustments. So we are approximately 4 minutes of angle to the right. So I made a 4 minute of angle adjustment to the left, fired 2 more shots, and instead of hitting here, they hit here. Now, this is common with cheap scopes, and this is why a lot of people, despite what they may or may not believe, don't have good zeros on their hunting rifles. Now, this is a fairly expensive rifle, and that's a fairly decent 2-shot group at 200 yards, but it's not where we adjusted. So at this point, I don't think this is the rifle. I think this is our scope adjustment. So from this adjustment, or from this 2 shots here, I made another adjustment, and that was, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes of angle down, and then 1.5 minutes to the left. And our next 2 shots hit right here. So closer, but not doing what it's supposed to do. Now I made another adjustment. Okay, this hole here, this is my bore sight, so ignore that one. This is our 3rd group here. I made another adjustment. At this point, I'm doing 1.5 minutes to the left and 1.5 minutes up. So 3 clicks left, 3 clicks up, 2 more rounds here. So now we're as high and left as we were low and right from an adjustment that should have put us here. Now this is what I mean by when you run a cheap scope, you can get them zeroed. It's frustrating, and a lot of times you're chasing your tail, but that's what we're dealing with here. So then we made another adjustment. So I figure if I'm 3 and 3 gets me too high and too left, I'll go down and over 2 each. So then I get one here and one here. Now this is, I believe, a combination of our cheap scope and our rifle finally getting too warm. So we're 32 degrees out here today, and I've been letting it cool just the amount of time it takes me to walk down to my target and back. So 5 minutes. We finally shot it too hot, and I'm pretty sure that's why we're seeing this. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to let it cool for about 20 minutes. I've got a piece of steel at 200, and I went ahead and used my Sharpie, and I made a nice black dot in the middle of my steel target. I'm going to let it completely cool, and then we're going to move to steel, shoot 1 or 2 rounds at 200 on steel. If we're pretty close, we're going to call that good enough. So, done chasing our tail. We're going to hope that we're pretty close to 0. And just kind of as an aside, I think anybody that bought a combo at Academy or wherever came with the scope on it, they went out, put a 0 on it. I bet you would be shocked to know how many people would come out here, shoot this 8.5 by 11 piece of paper at 200 yards and miss completely. But we'll let it cool. We're going to go ahead and go to steel, see what happens. All right, going to go ahead and send a round on the steel here at 200 yards. Okay, going to do one more. Okay, we've made another small adjustment, and we're going to go ahead and move on to 300 yards and check out that first subtension in the drop reticle. Okay, pretty solid hit there. I'm going to go ahead and move on to 400. Alright, so it looks like we're consistently hitting just a touch high here. That's not surprising. These reticles are, you know, they can't be correct for every single load. So they're just trying to get a general category of cartridges that drop about the same. So we're going to go ahead and move on to 500 yards, and we're going to keep that in mind. We'll probably hold just a little bit toward the bottom edge of the target, just so we're not shooting over. Keep in mind we've got a little bit of left to right wind here. I'm holding a little bit left, so at 300 yards there we hit a little left, probably had a little too much wind, and then at 400 yards there we drifted a little bit right in the wind, but still pretty good results. So we'll move on to 500. All right, final target at 500 yards here. You can probably see some of that mirage. Go ahead and load up another and see if we can get on steel. Okay, so unfortunately, as I was taking that last shot at 500 yards there, my phone died. So no big deal. It gave me a little bit of time to let this rifle cool back off as it was starting to warm up. So what I'm going to do now is going to go ahead and take another confirmation 0 shot at 200 here. And then I was able to play back the footage on the 500 yard shot. I noticed that I shot just right over the top of the target, which is kind of what I expected to be, shooting a little bit high. I held low, but not quite low enough. So we're going to take a confirmation shot here at 200 and then try that 500 yard shot again. Okay, I made a last adjustment based on that 200 yard cold bore 0 check there. I got 2 rounds left in this box. We're going to go ahead and see if we can get on at 500. Looks like that last round was just over the top of the target again. We're going to try to bracket a little lower and send this last round and see if we can make a hit. Okay, well, unfortunately we were unable to get on to the 500 yard target there. Obviously I would have liked to make a hit, but I just ran out of ammo. We're not exactly lining up with the drop reticle. And that's understandable. Those reticles are not exact. They're meant to fit a wide array of different rifles, calibers, loadings, all that stuff. These are 150 grains, so they're going a little faster probably than what a typical 300 Win Mag loading is going to do with like a 180 grain. But gonna call it good. We ran out of ammo. I'm not gonna mess around with it anymore. I'm confident that the 200 yard zero is good. And that's a lot further than this rifle is probably ever going to shoot in its life. So I'm going to call it good and send this on back. One last note before I wrap up. I'm going to make another one of these setup videos with a custom 7 PRC, a really nice rifle, and kind of show you how much easier using high quality components makes something like this. So look forward to that in the next video. Well, hey, if you guys made it to the end of the video here, I appreciate you watching. If this is something you'd be interested in and you're near the Abilene, Texas area, I'm going to put my email address in the description below. And if you'd like me to take your rifle and either set it up for you or shoot it and gather some drop data, just send me an email and we can work something out and get you ready for hunting season. So thanks for watching.